Hello, I am so excited to be teaching you again. So we are going to be doing history today. We are going to be focusing on units 7 and 8, so you will need to do pages 1 to 6. Okay, so topic 2, the first farmers in southern Africa, and we are going to be learning about pottery. Archaeologists study the remains from the past, such as human and animal skulls, bones, and artifacts. Artifacts such as pottery can tell us a lot about a society. Pots were important in the day-to-day lives of farming people. They were used for storing water, milk, and food. They were also used for cooking. Women made pots from clay. Pots had different styles and were painted different colors. Women shaped, decorated, and polished their pots in different ways. So just like we've got different pots that are so nicely decorated and they're different shapes now, it was the exact same in those days. Okay, now we've got some key words. Before we look at the key words, let's just look at the picture. It says some African women still make pots today. They make them in the same way as they did in the past. So this means that they still use clay to make these pots. Okay, let's look at our keywords. Artifacts. These are things such as tools, weapons, pottery, and buildings which were made by people and provide information about the past. Pottery. Pots shaped from moist clay and hardened by heat. Ceremonies. Public events held at important times in a community's life. The same words are repeated and the same actions are followed. So think of a wedding. This is a ceremony. Often the same lines are repeated as people say their vows and the minister will marry them. And then there's usually a celebration afterwards. So that is what a ceremony is. Initiation. A period of instruction in which teenagers are accepted as adults. Ancestors. The spirits of those who have died. Okay, so we've got activity 8, answer questions about African pots. Which of the following statements about pots is incorrect? Explain your answer. So we are going to read through these. You're going to say which statement is incorrect, and then you're going to explain why it is incorrect. 1. Pots were used for storing food. 2. Pots were used for cooking. 3. Pots were made from clay. 4. Pots were made by men. 5. Pots were decorated. 6. Pots are artifacts. Pottery, religion, and the Lydenburg Heads. The Lydenburg Heads, which you can see in the photograph below, so I've put it on the next page, are 2 important artifacts that can tell us a lot about traditional farming communities. In the early 1960s, a little boy found small pieces of broken clay objects, and they were found under the ground in Lydenburg in Mpumalanga province. Archaeologists put the pieces together very carefully. When the pieces were put together, they turned out to be hollow pottery sculptures of human-like heads. Okay, so here we've got the pictures that were mentioned on the previous page. The heads can be seen today in the South African Museum in Cape Town. 2 of these human-like heads are big enough to have been worn as masks. The other 5 smaller heads could have been attached to a costume or carried on poles. They were made in around 500 AD. Okay, so there you can see the picture, and it says these magnificent pottery artifacts are known as the Lydenburg Heads. Okay, then let's read this information. What were the Lydenburg Heads used for? Archaeologists believe that other heads like the Lydenburg Heads were probably used in initiation ceremonies. Before becoming adults, teenagers went through special initiation ceremonies. In these ceremonies, ancestors were asked to accept these young people as full members of their communities. The heads were used to help contact the ancestors in the spirit world. So they believed that these heads were They helped to communicate with the ancestors. At the end of the initiation, the heads were broken and buried as they were believed to be dangerous. Okay, now let's look at this picture and the information about it. Specularite is a mineral with a silvery color. It glistens when turned in the light. Specularite was placed on parts of these clay masks so that in public ceremonies they would have shimmered when they moved in the light. There you can see in the picture it actually looks quite shiny and shimmery. Activity 9. Order information about the Lydenburg Heads. The following sentences about the Lydenburg Heads are not written in the order in which the actual events happened. Write the sentences in the correct order under the heading, the Lydenburg Heads. Okay, so it's important to take note of your instructions over there. Please make sure to write that heading down. The Lydenburg Heads were put on display in a museum. 2. The masks were broken and buried. 3. Hundreds of years later, a little boy found the broken pieces under the ground in Lydenburg. 4. Archaeologists put the clay pieces together, saw that they were magnificent masks, and called them the Lydenburg Heads. 5. Long ago, teenagers were initiated into adulthood using clay masks. Okay, so remember you need to put all of this in order, please. Topic 2, the first farmers in Southern Africa. Unit 8, trade. So we've got keywords, subsistence farmers. So these are farmers who produce just enough from themselves and their families to live on. Then trade, that is the exchanging of goods. African farmers did not live in isolation from one another. They knew where different chiefdoms were settled, even those that were far away. Good information about neighboring villages was valuable for trading, and villagers exchanged goods with one another. African farming villages lived mainly as subsistence farmers. They grew their own crops and kept their own cattle, sheep, and goats. They also made some things for themselves and some things for trade. For example, a village that existed in an area that was rich in iron or produced iron tools. Okay, so what it means is that, so African farmers, they did not stay far away from each other and had no contact with one another. They ended up speaking to each other and trading things when necessary. With subsistence farming, as you saw, they had their own livestock, so they had their own cows and sheep and things like that, and they had their own crops. So with this, they could live off of things that they themselves produced. A village that existed in an area that was rich in copper produced jewelry. They then exchanged iron and copper goods for cattle with groups of people who lived in areas where there was no iron or copper ore. These people in turn traded some of the metal goods they received with the khoi in exchange for cattle. African farmers also traded metal tools with the San in exchange for animal furs and hides. Okay, so these people were actually awesome. So they saw somebody else and they were like, oh, they've got what I need. And then the other people looked at these people and they were like, oh, well, you've got what I need. And then they met with each other and they exchanged goods. So instead of maybe paying with money, they paid each other with goods to help each other out. Now you've got your activity. Activity 10. Complete the sentences about trading. Farmers grew their own crops and kept their own livestock. 2. Farmers who had too much iron or would with farmers who had what they needed. 3. Was often used to make jewelry. 4. African farmers sometimes traded with the sand for animal furs. You will get all of this information from the previous slide. Great job. Thank you for working so hard. I am so proud of you and I can't wait for our next lesson.